When God chooses you, He doesn't send you comfort first. He sends you conflict. And if you've been wondering why your life feels more like a battlefield than a blessing, it's because you carry something hell is terrified of. And whether you realize it or not, your calling has already provoked war in the unseen, because chosen people are never hidden forever, and heaven doesn't call without awakening opposition, and you might be feeling like you're stuck in delay, drowning in isolation, or pressed down by trials that don't match your level of obedience. But this is not a mistake. It's a pattern, it's a mark. It's the sacred pressure of being handpicked by God for a purpose so disruptive that your very presence threatens darkness, even when you speak no words. And the first unavoidable struggle you will face when you are chosen is rejection, because favor attracts friction, and the people you thought would stand beside you will suddenly go silent. Not because they hate you, but because they're not built for the weight you're about to carry. And Joseph was favored by his father, but thrown in a pit by his brothers, not because he sinned, but because his dream exposed their lack of one. And you need to stop mourning who left, because if their absence was enough to crush your calling, they would still be here. And sometimes God allows you to be rejected, not to punish you, but to reroute you. Because rejection is not always a curse, it's often a redirection into the wilderness where the real preparation begins. And Jesus himself was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows acquainted with grief, Isaiah 53:3. So what makes you think you can be chosen and loved by all at the same time? And if rejection hurts, that's proof you're not numb, but don't let it become a reason to retreat. Because the second struggle is isolation, not because you don't belong, but because where God is taking you, crowds can't follow. And when you're chosen, God doesn't start by putting you on a platform. He puts you in a cave, a desert, a hidden place where your applause is silence and your only affirmation is the word, and you'll find yourself wondering if you're forgotten. But chosen people are never forgotten. They're just hidden until their appointed time. And David was anointed king in the presence of his brothers, yet sent back to the sheep. Because public oil doesn't mean instant elevation. It means private crushing, and in the silence of isolation. God kills off your addiction to noise approval and results, because before he trusts you with impact, he tests your intimacy. And if you're isolated, it's not to starve you. It's to strip you of dependence on the wrong sources. So when you rise, it's with roots so deep that no storm can shake them. And you need to stop assuming silence means abandonment. Because some of the greatest revelations come not through volume, but through stillness. As Psalm 46:10 reminds us, be still and know that I am God. And in that stillness, a third struggle rises: spiritual attack. Not because you're weak, but because you're loaded with potential, and hell doesn't waste resources on neutral people. But when you're chosen, you become a threat, and threats are always targeted, and the warfare won't make sense to others because they don't carry what you carry. And suddenly your sleep is stolen, your mind is plagued with confusion, your joy feels disconnected, and nothing external seems to explain it. Because what you're facing is not circumstantial, it's spiritual. And if you try to fix a demonic assault with a carnal response, you'll end up exhausted but not delivered. And Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood." So stop blaming people for a war they can't see and put on your armor. Because this isn't about personality, it's about principalities, and your assignment has stirred up adversaries that you don't even know by name. But they know yours, and they've been studying your line, your weakness, your wounds, because generational bondage doesn't break by accident, and you've been marked to interrupt cycles, which means you won't just face your own giants. You'll face the ones your parents never had the courage to fight. And the pressure you're under isn't just about you, it's about everyone coming after you. And if you break, they stay bound, but if you rise, they get free, so you can't afford to quit. Just because the attack's intensified. In fact, that's confirmation you're getting closer, because the devil doesn't fight what he isn't afraid of. And maybe you've been feeling like giving up because the fourth struggle has crept in: discouragement. That subtle shadow that whispers, what if it's not working? What if I'm not really chosen? And you've been doing the right things with no visible results, praying and not hearing back, sowing and not seeing harvest, fasting and still feeling heavy. And let me tell you, that is not failure, that is formation. And sometimes God delays the fruit to deepen your faith. And Galatians 6:9 tells us, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not give up." And the key word is due season, not your schedule. Because chosen people don't grow by sight. They grow by surrender. And if you're discouraged, it means you're doing something that hell once stopped. So don't let your fatigue talk you out of your future. Because the fifth struggle is the most subtle of all identity confusion. And it hits hardest when you're tired. Because when your soul is weary, the enemy doesn't tempt you with sin. He tempts you with doubt. Not doubt about God, but doubt about you, your worth, your voice, your belonging. And if he can't destroy your calling, he'll try to distort your character. And if you don't know who you are, you'll start performing for acceptance instead of living from identity. And that's when you become vulnerable to manipulation, compromise, and cycles of shame that make you forget you're already sealed, already called, already loved. And Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, not with pleasure, but with identity. If you are the Son of God, and if the enemy questioned Christ's identity, don't be surprised when he questions yours, but your identity is not in your feelings, your followers, or your failures. It's in Christ alone. And Colossians 3:3 reminds us your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And if that's true, then you're not defined by what you're going through, but by the one who brought you to it and will bring you through it. So when you begin to question why your life feels heavier than others, why you seem to fight battles no one else around you even perceives, why your path is lonelier, messier, slower, and more violent than expected, it's not because you're cursed. It's because you're carrying divine weight, and divine weight is not visible on the outside, but it's felt in your spirit like a fire shut up in your bones. And sometimes the reason people can't help you is because they haven't survived what you're surviving, and you keep looking for support from people who were never designed to understand your storm. And that's why Job's friends misinterpreted his suffering. That's why Elijah sat under a broom tree alone. That's why Moses couldn't enter the promised land with the people he led. And you need to understand that being chosen doesn't mean being comfortable. It means being consecrated. And consecration always includes cutting, and you can't be set apart without first being torn apart. And if you've been feeling like God has been stripping you, don't confuse it with punishment. It's preparation. And John 15:2 says he prunes every branch that does bear fruit so that it will be even more fruitful. And pruning doesn't feel holy. It feels like loss, like subtraction, like unanswered prayers and doors that don't open, no matter how loud you knock. And you start asking why God gave you this vision if he was just going to delay it. But what you call delay, God calls divine pacing. Because when you're chosen, timing isn't just about readiness, it's about alignment. And you may be ready for the promise, but the world may not be ready for you. And the place God's sending you may still be occupied by someone he's about to remove. And you need to trust that the timing of your release is not based on your desire, but on God's eternal plan. And if you go early, you sabotage what was supposed to last. And the wilderness you hate may be the womb of the promise you prayed for. And just like Israel wandered, not because God was confused, but because they were being shaped, sometimes God lets you circle so he can kill off what would have killed the promise. And chosen people are often late in man's eyes, but right on time in heaven's. And you might be feeling weary because it seems like everything is warfare and nothing is breakthrough. And you wonder if maybe you misheard God. Maybe you missed your window. Maybe you imagined the dream. But let me tell you, if it's too big for you, too painful for your flesh, and too deep for your friends to comprehend, that's a sign it's real, because flesh dreams of comfort, but the spirit dreams of surrender. And real callings require real crushing, and you may be in a Gethsemane season where your will is bleeding under the weight of heaven's assignment. But remember, Luke 22:44 says Jesus prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like drops of blood, and yet he stayed. And if Jesus stayed in Gethsemane to birth redemption, then maybe your breakthrough is not in the escape, but in the endurance. And chosen people don't run from pressure. They bow under it until heaven responds. And if you're in the middle of contradiction, where your anointing says one thing, but your life looks like the opposite, you're in the right place. Because contradiction is the furnace that proves calling. And if your situation seems to disagree with your prophecy, that's normal, because God never speaks to where you are. He speaks to who you are becoming, and what you're going through is not a contradiction of the promise, but a confirmation of the process. And you might feel like you're failing because you're feeling everything so deeply. Pain, silence, loneliness, temptation, self-doubt. But chosen people don't get to skip the cup. And Jesus prayed, "Let this cup pass." And heaven still said no, because some cups can't be avoided, only endured. And if he didn't bypass the suffering for the Son, he won't bypass it for you. Not because he's cruel, but because he's committed to your maturity. And maturity doesn't come by shouting. It comes by staying, by showing up when your soul doesn't want to, by worshiping when you don't feel it, by obeying when it doesn't make sense. And if you've been doing all that and still feel overlooked, remember that God is not unjust to forget your labor, Hebrews 6:10, and what you're doing in secret is screaming in the Spirit. And when you're chosen, your life becomes a weapon even when you feel like a wound. And that's why all hell fights you when you start walking in alignment. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you finally stopped compromising and your decisions are making noise in the unseen realm. And the enemy isn't afraid of your survival, he's afraid of your surrender. Because survival can still be selfish, but surrender births legacy, and you might be the first in your bloodline to choose righteousness when rebellion was easier to pursue, purity when compromise was common to break generational strongholds without applause or support. And that makes you dangerous, not just to hell, but to every system that expected you to fold. And you keep wondering why the pressure increased after your yes. It's because your yes wasn't to comfort, it was to crucifixion. And you said yes to something that costs everything. And most people want elevation, but they don't want death. And Jesus said, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. John 12:24, which means your death to self is the door to multiplication. And if God is allowing you to be broken, it's because he plans to feed nations through your obedience. And this is why your life doesn't look like theirs. Why your battles seem darker, why your delays feel longer, why your silence lasts deeper, because you are not called to blend in. You are called to break through, and breakthrough never begins on the surface. It begins in your guts, in your tears, in your willingness to keep walking when every step screams, quit. And the reason most people never walk in their full anointing is because they confuse comfort with confirmation. But being chosen is rarely comfortable, it's holy, it's sacred, it's costly. And if you've been marked by God, you've also been marked by warfare. And your life will become evidence of the invisible, a signpost in the wilderness, a fire that burns but doesn't consume, because you are not just surviving, you are being forged like steel in the flame. And when God forges a vessel for glory, he doesn't rush the fire, he perfects it. And the heat you feel is not hell, it's the holy furnace of refinement. And if you stay long enough, if you don't run from the heat, if you let the old version of you die, something unshakable will emerge. And what once crushed you will no longer touch you, because God never chooses a person without crushing their pride, stripping their idols, and severing their dependence on anything but him. And it will feel like loss, but it's actually liberation, because some chains look like blessings. And God will remove what you thought was essential just to show you that he is enough. And if he has to, he'll blind you, like Paul, so you stop trusting your sight and start trusting his voice. And when the dust settles, you'll realize you didn't lose your life. You found it. And this is the secret of the chosen. Their greatness is not in how loud they shout, but in how long they stand when no one's watching, how faithfully they obey when it doesn't make sense, how boldly they pray when answers delay, and how purely they love when it costs them everything. Because being chosen isn't about spotlight, it's about stewardship. And God will give you influence only after he can trust you with isolation. He'll give you platform only after you've learned to worship in silence. And when you're chosen, your reward is not applause, it's authority. The kind of authority that breaks chains with words, that shifts atmospheres with silence, that makes demons tremble when you walk into a room. Not because of who you are, but because of who walks with you. And that authority doesn't come cheap, it comes through fire. And if you're in it now, don't curse it, yield to it. Because what you call struggle is what heaven calls training, and your tears are not wasted, they are collected in bowls. Revelation 5:8, and your labor is not in vain. And if you've been fighting in secret, carrying things you can't explain, standing alone with a sword in one hand and a wound in the other, Heaven sees you, and you may feel hidden, but you are not forsaken. And while the world is watching those who build fast, God is building you to last. And when He brings you out, it won't be because you demanded it. It will be because you were ready, and every struggle you've endured will become oil every night. You cried will become light. Every disappointment will become a testimony. And you will walk in rooms you never campaigned for. Doors will open that no man can shut, not because of who you impressed, but because of who you became in the fire. And this is why the struggle cannot be skipped, because the struggle is sacred. And if you've been asking God to remove it, maybe the better prayer is, God, refine me through it. Because once you've been through what you're going through now, you'll never be the same again. Not weaker, but wiser, not harder, but holier. And the enemy should have taken you out while he had the chance. Because what's coming next isn't just your victory. It's your assignment, it's your release. It's the moment where everything you endured becomes everything you're entrusted with. And now is not the time to retreat. It's the time to rise, to remember who you are, to step into the fire, not to burn, but to blaze. And when the fire clears and the winds stop howling, the ones who will still be standing are not the ones who had the biggest voices, but the ones who had the deepest roots. And if you've made it this far through isolation, rejection, warfare, confusion, and contradiction, congratulations, you're not broken, you're chosen, and the struggle didn't stop you, it shaped you.